And Stephen K. Peeples here. I'm with Marty Jourard of the Motels, and we're continuing our series of interviews about the Motels history. And in our last chat, we were talking about the band's fifth album for Capitol, Shock, and the tour that followed it. And the last gig was at the end of 1985. So kind of pick up the story from there, Marty, if you could, and tell us what happened after the tour ended and what was the plan for the sixth album.
Sure. We took a month off after we did that whole year and the Shock tour. We ended up it was a New Year's gig at the Hollywood Palladium, December 31st, 85. So in my notes, yeah, and February 13th, 86, I wrote down began sixth, try saying sixth LP, which, as we know, turned into Martha Davis's first solo album. But that was the year where it all unfolded, such as it did.
But you didn't know that at the time.
No.
Beginning of the year, beginning of 86, you're figuring it's going to be the sixth album, and you're working on songs with Richie Zito again producing, right?
Yes, well, we eventually worked with him, but the process, how we did it was Martha had a garage there at her house in Encino that she did not park her car in, so it was all kitted out as a place to rehearse and record demos. And at one point, see here, she got an Akai 12-track digital recorder, which there were all these formats going on back then. There was the Alesis ADAT hadn't come along yet. That was the 90s. But back then, there was 4-track cassette recorders that a lot of people used. The cassette would run at twice the speed, and you could do 4 independent tracks. And there were TAC 4 tracks and many formats, but this was just to work the songs out. Right. So we spent about a year, not every day, but we spent a year going to Martha's garage. And then we played some basketball in the driveway. Everybody had their hoop as usual, and she had one. And it was the band, including Scott Thurston and Guy Perry, Michael Goodrow, Brian Glasscock, Martha, and me. And Martha would write songs, and we would demo them, and I would try to come up with some with Michael, and we demo them. We had, I noticed here, it says April 28th, Motel career meeting. I think what happened at this point was the Motels, this is a side issue, when we got signed in 79 and the money came from Capitol for the signing, we did not get lump sums each, which was very clever and smart, because you could blow that at a weekend at a racetrack. And then what are you going to do? For the 8 years I was in the Motels, drew a salary every month, and that included withholding taxes and Social Security and everything. So I often got a refund at the end of the year, but it was steady money, just like I was working a factory job. And I never gave it a second thought. And I never really worried about cash flow, because it wasn't a lot, but it was just like that. And we're talking about 5 albums. So Martha announced that Capitol was not particularly interested in advancing more money to support Martha Davis and 5 other players to be on a payroll, so to speak. They didn't want to put out that money for this 6th album. And so Martha, it was told us that you're going to be on half salary. Whatever it was, you're going to be on half. So at one point, I got a job at a computer store called PC Land. It was in West LA, and I learned how to do DOS, and I was doing that, and this guy hired rock and rollers. He was a real fan of the Motels, and he goes, oh yeah, well, just learn how to do this. And I was selling computers. I tried to sell one to Kurt Russell once. Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn came in. I had no idea who they were. I was such a moron. I tried to sell a computer. Anyway, so I was on half salary. It was a strange year for me, because on top of the music we were doing, I also thought, what else can I do for money? And this odd thing came my way. Capitol Records was called by Leslie Decter. Leslie Decter and his partner Peterman had a commercial firm. They did television commercials. Peterman Decter, and they did the Levi's 501 Blues ones that were very famous for being super avant-garde and Super 8 handheld cameras and not really ads, trying to not look like a commercial. And they didn't hire real actors. They hired people to wear these jeans. They called up Capitol and said, do you have a saxophone player? We want to have a saxophone player in a commercial. So Capitol called me, and this went on in May of '86. They said, I want you to show up at this place in Hollywood, bring your saxophone. And I thought it was a recording session. I had no idea. So I walked into this room and there's a camera on me, and it was Leslie Decter and his partner Peterman. And they were looking for somebody that was not an actor who was a sax player. So there I was. And it was for a contact lens commercial. And I ended up getting it because I just was so like, whatever. I didn't have any, I am a commercial actor and I want this thing vibe. So I ended up doing this contact lens commercial, and I got into Screen Actors Guild for it, and I ended up getting $7,000. It ran all in the summer, that summer. It just completely a windfall. So that was nice. Then I decided maybe I could be a commercial actor, and I had no acting chops whatsoever. If you see me involved,
did you get the contact lenses for free?
No. It's funny because I wore contact lenses. It was a generic ad for contacts.
Okay.
And I could not act my way out of a paper bag. Just look at me and Only the Lonely. You know, just forget it. You know, I'm also not a brain surgeon, but I kept showing up for these, and I only did one, and then I tried for another one, which was a Maxwell House commercial. But they had a soap opera actress come in, and she had no conception of how to do a commercial, and she wasn't very good. And so that was the end of my career. It was an accidental thing. But during this year,
collateral damage when she blew it, right?
Yeah, she blew it. She kept saying, try to make me laugh, you know, when I come up to you, because she was supposed to be perky because she was on coffee. It was a coffee Maxwell House commercial. Anyway, we don't have to belabor that, but
yeah,
just never know. It's only because I was a sax player that they wanted me. I ended up being a street musician. And the joke was, I'm in downtown LA in this slummy area, and I'm a street musician, supposedly, and this woman wearing contact lenses is a photographer, is so happy with her contact lenses, and she's taking pictures of me. The joke being, I have a dog. I'm supposed to be this homeless guy with a sax, and this dog is a championship greyhound. And the owner was all worried because they were spraying water on the ground, you know, to make it look shiny, and how they do that in movies and videos.
Yeah.
And she was worried the dog was going to get sick. Anyway, that happened, as we say.
They should have got a mutt from the pound. That's bad casting.
Yeah. So that was going on during the year we were trying to make this 6 Motels album. Meanwhile, Scott Thurston decided that he wasn't going to stick around, and he went off with Jackson Browne and started playing with Jackson Browne and playing all these benefits for no money. And he ended up producing an album with Jackson, and Scott went in his merry way from Jackson on to Tom Petty. So he sort of drifted away at that point, never to be seen again as a Motel.
Right.
And then along came June, and then I noticed that we delivered Shock a year previous. So it had been a year since that. That's the middle of '86. I was asked to play. I'm just showing you how random my year was. It was a strange year. Steve Berlin from Los Lobos called me up and said, we're doing this soundtrack for La Bamba. And there's a scene where Richie Valens is walking to his first audition up to this garage, and there's a garage band in there playing, and they're really bad. So we need some really bad sax playing and piano playing to be heard. And Steve says, and I thought of you. So come on down and play really bad sax and keyboard on this song. It was Charlena. Now, Los Lobos had recorded Charlena, a very beautiful version of it. Oh, Charlena. So I was asked to come in to play out of tune saxophone, because it's a bad band that Richie Valens is auditioning for, and really bad piano triplets on Charlena. And it was funny because I was paid double scale because I was a leader, and Steve handed me this, and I go, Steve, I don't know how to really interpret why you thought of me. Thanks for the gig. But after
that's kind of a left-handed compliment, if you will.
Backhander, but you know, what's not to like? But the funny thing is when you spent your whole life trying to play saxophone on pitch and play triplets on rhythm, it's very difficult to purposely not do it.
Right, right.
But I purposely did it, and they paid me, and it turns out that I don't think it even showed up in the movie, but that's how movies go. They take stuff out.
Well, did you manage to archive a clip of it for yourself anyway?
No, I wasn't
Off the cutting
archiving
room
anything.
floor?
I was just showing up and doing these sessions. And then just because I knew him, I went attended this Tom Petty and Bob Dylan rehearsal. They were rehearsing together, and that was fun. The La Bamba thing, Martha got her that 12 track in July. I see a note here. I was doing some song with Mark Goldenberg. I guess I was maybe playing on his demo. He's the guy that wrote Justine and How Do I Make You? I think that was him. He works with Linda. He was on the scene. And then at the end of 86, I started working at that computer store.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned how to, assemble computers. And in fact, I learned how to do computers. This is like the early years of when they first started making clones.
Yeah.
That was 86. And it doesn't take long to finish this up, because in January of 87, Guy quit the band for what that was worth in the 19th. And then we were doing some more recording of the Enterprise. We were working on stuff. Oh, it was 2 weeks. There were 2 weeks when the band, we all sat there on our hands basically at Enterprise, which is a recording studio, where Richie Zito and Gary Chang, who has done soundtracks, 52 Pickup, and he's very talented. He's very much on the scene now. Gary Chang, he had a synclavier, which was essentially a keyboard that could play everything, including
Guitar,
digital hand claps, and just any sound there was. It was Gary Chang, Richie Zito, Martha, and I think they brought in a drummer. And we were watching this go down. We would show up and just watch it. And if we were needed, we would play, but we were never needed, and we never played. And it was a bit
torturous to, wasn't that kind of torturous to sit there and watch this happening without being able to participate in it? Or was it,
it was
good and you were fine with not participating in it?
I was not fine with it. Nobody was. It was puzzling, because it was like we weren't working, but we also were there, which is a sort of a funny way to break a band up. And after 2 weeks, and I've talked to Martha about this in recent times, she goes, I just didn't know what to do. She was just having a hard time with the whole situation, the whole music business, whatever. You have to talk to her about it. But after 2 weeks of this, and I was bringing books to read, and we were watching, one of the funniest things is, here they are in a recording studio, and they need hand claps on this track. It's a Martha track. And there's a microphone there, and everybody has hands. And it could easily have been recorded, but they spent about 2 hours looking for the hand clap file on the synclavier, the sample. I distinctly remember that. So it was getting pretty funny. And then that was the Friday, the March 13th, February 13th, 1987, as each one of us showed up. I think by then, I know by then, Martha said, I got to fire the band. And one by one, we'd show up. We didn't show up in a group because we lived in different places. And she took us to this local bar, and we're talking about in the morning. Every time we went there, let's go, I want to talk to you. And she'd have a drink with us. And then I'd go, okay, there's no more band. And I went home and kind of curled up. And
was it the same bar?
It's the same bar. And then I guess
what was it?
Huh?
Was it Barney's?
No, this was in North Hollywood. I have
North
no idea.
Hollywood, okay.
Yeah. But at the end of the afternoon, I'm sure she was pretty tanked, and everybody got their little goodbye, and we all went home. And I've said this before, it was devastating, because Stan Lynch said the same thing about getting tanked from the Heartbreakers. This isn't a normal job, as you may have suspected. This is a life, I won't say lifestyle, because it was my life, pretty much. It wasn't a part-time job. For 8.5 years, that's what I did. And I'm not going to dwell on it, but it wasn't like, oh, I'll find another job. I got fired from being a salesperson, I'll go to this place. It wasn't that way. 2 weeks later, Stan Lynch, who's my old buddy, he realized where I was at. He was still in the Heartbreakers. And there was a KMET benefit at the Hollywood Palladium because KMET FM station something was going on where they needed to raise money. And Stan said, listen, I know you're bummed out. Why don't you come and be the leader of this band that is going to play the Palladium to raise money for this radio station? And the band consisted of me, Stan Lynch, Al Cooper, Gary Myrick, Myron Schomburger, whoever that was, Stan Lynch on drums, and Bob Glaub on bass. Now, these are all heavy-duty folks. Al Cooper played Red House. And I was doing some R&B sax, and it was the greatest thing to do for me because I was pretty screwed up about the band breaking up. But 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later, I was on stage leading this band. I mean, leading's kind of funny. They didn't need my leadership, but I was kind of the MC of this band. And that was a wonderful feeling. And I'll always remember that. That was the end of the Motels 1.0 right there.
Boom. So what did you do? And what happened with Martha? I mean, Martha went on. Let's start with what Martha did. Martha continued on the path recording the next album, and it turned out to be a Martha solo album.
Yes. I just happen to have it here. It is
just how handy.
Yeah, what do you know? Okay, well, Policy, Martha Davis, Policy.
Now, at this point, the Motels kind of had started off just like briefly looking at the arc of the career, started out as a new wave group and kind of morphed into a pop new wave group. And Martha was emerging as a kind of a chanteuse, I guess. And I think the label was trying to encourage her to go solo. There was some pressure on her from the label to do that. Is that not correct?
That is correct. If you cast a cold analytical view on the situation, you look at a band that has as charismatic and talented a leader as, the Police or Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers or the Motels, and you go, who's the one person, if they don't show up, there's no show. And honestly, they can find a sub for everybody but the lead singer and songwriter. So Capitol certainly looked at it that way. And
was this kind of a reaction also to the fact that Shock didn't do quite as well as the previous two albums?
Well, I'm sure it didn't help that it didn't do as well as the previous two albums.
And the original deal was it a 5-album deal, or was it re-upped every time, or how did that work? Was the original deal a 5-album deal?
Yes,
and now we're into overtime, right?
It might have been a 3-album deal, but that's a very funny thing to say because it means nothing on a certain level. What it means is that it doesn't mean that you've just signed a 3-album deal and you're going to put out 3 albums on Capitol come hell or high water. What it means is they will certainly put out 1 album or they wouldn't bother signing you. And if it doesn't do anything, they don't have to do anything after that. But if it does, you are obligated to put out the 2nd and 3rd album. So it's a one-sided deal.
Right.
And then there was a re-sign, and not to drill down too much into legality, but I believe what happened is that the only entity signed to Capitol Records, the only human, was Martha Davis. And Martha Davis, we were signed to Martha Davis Productions, everybody that wasn't Martha that was in the band.
Right. And
Martha Davis Productions basically delivered a product that Martha delivered to Capitol.
Right.
None of this matters. I got paid either way. I was on salary, as I said. But Martha put out this record, and it was, I would say, if I consider Shock as sort of the final life, the final style of what the production and the 80s music was going to, if you just took that even one step further, what you got was this record, which did pretty well in Australia. And my feelings about a Motels album not happening and turning into this are colored by the fact that I was in the Motels and now there were no more Motels. But there's some good songs on it. However, this was an example of how you take someone that's very talented and the music business engulfs them with, this is how you make a hit. the first song on this Motels solo album, Martha Davis solo album, is written by Diane Warren. Now, Martha Davis had no problem writing a song, but they had Diane Warren write the #1 song. And this was a very top budget album. It had Randy Jackson on bass, Gary Chang, as I was saying, played synth on it. Richie Zito, a great guitar player, way before we got involved with them, played guitar on it. Other players included Clarence Clemens played sax on one song, and Kenny G played soprano on the last song. And it was funny because I played soprano on the demo of that song. It's called Bridge of Sighs. No, I'm sorry. It was another song, but I remember playing soprano on the demo. So they, instead of me playing on Martha's album, they got Kenny G to play soprano.
Now, did he replicate your part, or did he make it his own?
I didn't bother to listen. No. Let me put it this way. This is a neutral statement.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody plays soprano sax quite like Kenny G.
Okay, that can go either way, right?
That's a neutral statement. So she put it out, and there was one song on it that I really liked, and we played this when we went to Australia, because this record did well in Australia. And when the Motels, with me back in the band in later years, went to Australia, we played this song, and it was called "Don't Tell Me the Time," a Martha Davis pure pop song, beautifully written. I love that. It was a pleasure to play that one. We also played "Tell It to the Moon" that Diane Warren wrote, because it was a semi-hit in Australia. But she toured Australia, Martha, to some extent with some band, and she did well there. But at that point, that was 1987, and I was off just being married, and I formed my own rhythm and blues band that was just playing all kinds of saxophone songs and some originals. So I kept playing music after the Motels broke up. It was
you got to flex your King Curtis vibe.
Yeah.
In the R&B band.
I asked my brother Jeff. I said, Jeff, let's
Locomotive, right? Locomotive. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I put a band together called Locomotive, a locomotive. And I had Jeff play guitar. Now, this was us playing all the stuff we listened to back in Florida, all Junior Walker, King Curtis. I threw in a lot of 50s and 60s, Little Richard. Hell, we covered Mercy, Mercy, Mercy by the Buckinghams. It was strictly a party band. And we got a lot of work around town. We played the Lighthouse and Toad's Place and the Malibu Inn. I had this little rubber stamp. I had this little rubber stamp of a saxophone for every time we played a show.
Oh, so cool. Okay.
We were playing Madam Wong's West, and we were playing, on and on it goes. I mean, to give you an example, this is just the gigs. I was gigging Crayons, Club Lingerie, Wong's, Malibu Inn. I got married somewhere in there. Yeah, I got married in December '87. So that's what I did. And then I eventually moved to Seattle, but I kept playing music. And I had one sort of fascinating moment to me. It was 1986, and me and my soon-to-be wife went to the Vancouver. It's an international, like a World's Fair. And my cousin was a wine aficionado, and he was hosting this very well-known Italian wine guy, and we were at a VIP event there. Just we got in because of that. And there was champagne, and there was a grand piano, and it was real fancy. And I was getting kind of buzzed, and I thought, if I was cool, I would just go down there to that grand piano and just rip off some amazing thing, a pop standard or whatever, something. But I don't know how to play a damn thing on the piano. All I know is all these obscure, now extinct keyboard licks, like So Hey and Only the Lonely, that there's no more Motels. And I felt like a fraud. I felt like a musical fraud, because I was a keyboard player, and I'd been doing it, and I could not sit down at a piano and play one song. I might be able to play some boogie woogie. And it made me so mad, Stephen, it made me so mad that I started to just play piano.
How mad did it make you, Marty?
Quite, and at myself. And so instead of just seething, I started playing piano. I really started out playing Eric Satie pieces. He wrote children's pieces, and they were quite easy to play. And I always liked Satie, Eric Satie, the French composer, Gymnopédies and all that. And then I slowly learned to read music. I had this book called the Jazz Piano Book, and it had these great examples, but I couldn't really read piano music. I could read saxophone, treble, clef. So I gradually, the age of whatever I was, late 30s, learned to read music crudely but effectively. If I wanted to learn a song, I couldn't sight read, but I could figure it out from reading it. And I just played piano from 1987 until when I hooked up with Martha again later, like 2010.
How did that happen? What were the circumstances there?
I had lived in LA, and then I moved to Seattle in '89, and I'm still in Seattle area, a neighborhood. And Martha had lived in Fillmore, and then she moved up to near Portland, Oregon, which is only a 2-hour drive from my house to hers. And she said, "Hey, let's get together." So I drove down there, and she said, "We want to do a recut of Total Control because we want to own the master. Capitol has a master, and they charge too much for synchronization licenses, and people say, forget it. But if we have the master, then we can do what we want." And since she's the singer and I was the original sax player, and the guy who was playing with Martha knew how to replicate any sound, of course we could make it sound like the original because it was the original players.
Exactly.
So we did that. And then she says, "Why don't you come down and play? We're playing this club in Portland, play on 2 songs on sax." So I did that. Then it was
which 2 songs? Total Control and
no, it's a song called Mr. Gray.
Oh, okay.
First song she ever wrote, and it was just a really interesting kind of cabaret style song, and Total Control. And then it was I realized that I could work with her. We had no bad vibes. So much water under the bridge, and as I said before, we never ever said anything. Nobody in the band said anything unforgivable to anyone else. Where like, "I never want to see you again." It just wasn't that way. It's really always about the music on a certain level. And so then she said, "Well, why don't you come down and play some special shows?" I go, "Sure, just let me know." And then she goes, "Well, we've been asked to play the Hollywood Bowl opening for the Go-Go's. You want to do that one?" I go, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that one." So I did that one. That was later. It was I think 2014 or 2012, whatever it was. And then, "Do you want to play the LA County Fair? We're opening for the Bangles. We're playing with the Bangles." And so I was playing these high profile ones because she had a fully working band. They just didn't have sax solos when they played. And eventually the band and her said, "Look, you're in the band now, obviously, because now that you're in the band, we can have all the same sounds you had, and you can play the sax." We never had a sax player except back in the old days. And it was gradual, and it wasn't thought out, and it was natural. It was just very slowly I segued back into the band, pretty much the way I did back in 1978 when my brother said, "Hey, come and play in one song." So that's all I can tell you. And I'm still playing to the extent that we're playing live. That was 2010.
So it was all pretty organic in both cases, originally, and then the other way. Now, of course, sandwiched in between in that during that period was the VH1 Bands Reunited experience, which we've talked about, and I encourage our viewers and listeners to check that out. It's a great story how that came about, and how the band reunited after 17 some odd years of not playing together to play a one-off gig for the cameras and a TV special that was pretty cool. It's on YouTube now, but check that out. Marty has some pretty funny stories about that as well. So you rejoined the band. Now, who's in the band at this point?
There were a few changes from when I rejoined in 2011. The drummer came and went that was there. I don't remember his name, and the bass player came and went. So the lineup, the true, official, and excellent lineup, musically excellent, is Martha Davis and she plays guitar also on half the material. Me, Nicholas Johns, who I consider a genius musically. I mean, we can debate that, but he's certainly the most capable guy I've worked with routinely. He plays bass in the band, but he also toured as a drummer when we needed a drummer, and he played keyboard too, but now he's the bass player. And he also records us, and he's quite the talent. Clint Walsh on guitar, and he's been with Martha longer than I ever was. He's played with her for 20 years. He started out on bass. I think that's the entry drug to be a motel. She's thrown on bass. So he's a guitarist, Clint Walsh. And Eric Gardner is the drummer. Now, Eric Gardner is a very good session drummer and just all-around guy. He's a top player, the most steady Eddie guy. And he plays, like when we play Suddenly Last Summer, he's playing the drum machine part because that's what you're supposed to play and no other.
Yeah,
drum.
right. It's just a pattern. That's
and
great.
we get along really well. It's really strange. I mean, we're all older and supposedly smarter, but musically, I mean, we played last month, and it's just wow. We played in Montclair, as a matter of fact, and it was a good show. That's the lineup that is the lineup now, and that's when we play shows. That's the one we do. Those players.
Now, kind of, what do the audiences look like now compared to back in the day? And we've got 2 minutes left here in this particular chat.
There's older ones, obviously my age and older. They show up with just all this really sometimes really weird, what they think is new wave clothing, which cracks me up. But there's also a younger set. Suddenly Last Summer was used in American Horror Story a couple summers ago as the lead-in music, and suddenly a lot of people were hearing that were younger that watched that show. I think it's called American Horror Story. It's a series, and so people showed up on one tour just because of that. And when we play it, they went nuts because they were younger. So there's younger and older people there. It's kind of a surprise. I think
different generational touch points.
Yeah, I mean, one thing Martha has said is she didn't come up with it. She goes, "It's the won't go awayies. The 80s are still with us. It's 2023, and the 80s has this thing. It's like, oh, it was a great time. Everybody's having fun and whooping it up." And to a certain extent, it was true. But the music, the good music from that era is still around. The good songs survive and the bad ones don't. And it appears that we have several that are still good songs that survive on their own merit, separate from being out in the 80s.
Well, I think it's great that you and Martha and the band are still out there doing it and making all of the multi-generation fan base happy, but also being able to keep that same mojo that you had early on and bring it into the music, so that there's that unwritten or intangible element that makes it special. Still, it's not just rehashing and just rotely playing the songs. So Marty, I really thank you for your time and sharing all of these great stories with us. And I encourage everyone to go back and check out all of the videos in our series.
Thank you. Thanks for asking the questions.
We'll see you on the next time.
You know it. All right. Bye-bye.